Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 39 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello there, fans.
All right. Yes, I'm back in Los Angeles. Had to come back after the holidays were over, so no in-person podcast this week. But as we promised last time, we're going to be talking about the national championship game and all the fun, exciting stuff that came from that, the implications it has on the wider college football sphere, as well as some exciting developments that have occurred in the Nebraska world as well.
Yes. An exciting topic.
That's right. All right. So diving into the championship game to start with, the Clemson-Alabama game. Of course, Clemson ended up winning the game 35-31. I was at a little local bar, missed some of the first quarter, and made it there about halfway into the second. So I missed some of Alabama's dominance early, but I watched the whole game after that. There were a bunch of Clemson fans in the bar, so it was a lot of fun to see it with them.
And I was lucky because I never had the chance to do this in the past, to be in Vegas during the national championship game. So got to watch a major sporting event through the eyes of someone at a Vegas sports book, which was quite interesting. A lot of fun to experience that, the ups and downs, especially in that fourth quarter, the emotions of the room, as well as just being able to have fun, have a cold one while I watched the game with a bunch of strangers, but they all seemed like friends during that.
I'm curious, would you say there was more Bama or Clemson fans?
It seemed like there were more people rooting for Clemson, so I think there was more money on Clemson, at least in that room. And I was happened to be over at the MGM Grand for this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, what's funny is that you texted me and asked if I want to put down money, and I put some down on Clemson. I put it down the under on the game, and you, I guess, put it on the over, and so
yes, I chose winning. Alabama, and you won. But I thought I was the genius after that first quarter, because in evaluating the game, I mean, it's a little bit of a head scratcher to me, and obviously I don't know all the ins and outs of adjustments that were made by Clemson's defense and that sort of thing, but certainly early on there was a physical dominance that was going on at the line of scrimmage by Alabama, and they were running that football, it seemed, at will, and even though from the very get-go Alabama's quarterback wasn't necessarily on fire as far as throwing the football. And it seemed like Clemson had done a decent job of containing him on the occasions when he ran, but it didn't seem to matter. They were so dominant at the line of scrimmage that all they were going to need to do was run the football. But the adjustments happened, changes happened. Of course, the loss of Scarborough, the running back, at some point in the game also had a huge impact on Alabama's apparent ability to run. But I looked at the line of scrimmage, and it just seemed like there was a dominance there that was going to carry the day for Alabama. But it kind of slowly but surely was diminished by a really outstanding effort by the Clemson defense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and what struck me about it was that Alabama really, in my opinion, should have run the ball more, because when you look at the stats, Bama had 221 rushing yards, whereas Clemson only had 91. But Clemson actually had 42 attempts to Bama's 34. And I know that they lost one of their best running backs there pretty in the second quarter of the game, which hampered their ability to do it. But even after that, when they would run it, they would typically get, a few yards at least.
Absolutely. And it's not like Alabama's running back core isn't loaded with incredibly talented running backs. And when you're dominating at the offensive line the way they were, you could have put me back there, and I could have had some success running the football early. Seriously, they were blocking really well. They were getting the corner. They were sealing the edge. They were running right at them. They were doing anything they wanted to do, it seemed, early in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but then by the time I got there, Clemson was starting to move the ball a little bit more against them, and more importantly, Clemson's defense was starting to 3-and-out Alabama a lot, and I think that turned out to be the key difference maker in the game, was that Alabama's offense just started to struggle as they, their quarterback would be passing it, and Clemson's secondary would be getting in there, getting pressure on him,
Yeah.
and eventually Bama's defense, even though it's this amazing front four, eventually they just got tired because they were out in the field for so long.
Right, and their secondary, which has been kind of the Achilles heel. If there was a weak spot in Alabama's defense this year, it was that their secondary wasn't phenomenal in terms of coverage. That there were times when there were breakdowns. Not that they didn't have great physical talent, because obviously they were having like a pick six almost every game. But the fact is that there were times when they obviously had some people running wide open for Clemson. And as the game progressed, it just seemed like Deshaun Watson just got better and better at finding them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
those receivers made some incredible catches, as we've talked about already.
Yeah, no, they're number nine. There in the fourth quarter, I remember he made a couple spectacular catches that really caught my eye.
Right.
And what another surprising stat was that Clemson was 7 of 18 for third downs, which isn't great. You'd want to be over 50 on something like that. But then Bama was 2 for 15. So pretty
Yeah.
much any time Clemson put them in that situation, they couldn't convert.
Right, and that is an impressive stat. I would not have guessed that that were the case, certainly based on the early part, but the early part of the game. But that is exactly what they needed to do. I mean, if you go back to our previous podcast, in fact, Alex, and listen to what we talked about for what were the keys to the game for Clemson. If Clemson was going to beat Alabama, how are they going to do it? And basically, that's what we talked about. We talked about the fact that they had to basically, stop the running game of Alabama enough that they would force Alabama to make their young quarterback, a thrower. And they were able to do that. And they blitzed almost on, it seemed like every down. I mean, they were coming at it. And usually you do that, you live by the blitz, you die by the blitz. But they were able to get away with it because they kept that quarterback off target just enough. There were some pass plays deep that would have been, obviously big plays for Bama, but they weren't able to connect.
Yeah, well, and I definitely think that that quarterback kind of showed some of his youth and experience. Playing against such a good defense, and so as the game went on, Clemson was slowly getting more momentum, slowly chipping away at Bama's lead until finally in the fourth quarter they scored and went up for the first time in the game. But then Bama, turned everybody on their heads by having a couple big plays and scoring real quick right after that and putting themselves back in the lead, and it felt like we might be in for a repeat of last year's championship game.
Right, and I totally agree. It just seemed like Bama was almost playing with some cards they were holding back, and they knew that if things got tight, they would pull those cards out, and they sure did, and it seemed to work. And you thought, oh, here we go again. This is the way this is going to play out. Alabama's going to have another gear here that they're going to be able to open up because they've been kind of setting it up the whole game. But as it turned out, Deshaun Watson and those receivers were good enough and made some of those spectacular catches you talked about to basically close the deal. And what guts from the coach late in the game, as you mentioned, managing time the way he did.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, Dabo, with 2 minutes left, still being, and they got a good kickoff return to be fair, but being very aggressive and going running some plays and letting the clock run down, and like it seemed like at first I thought he was like not going for the win, that he was going to just settle for getting the field goal and going to overtime, but I think in his mind he was just being very cautious and trying to make sure that Bama didn't have any time left when they got the ball, if they got the ball, which is fair given how dominant they were in that previous possession. And then, as it turns out, he was able to, get into the red zone there with 20 seconds left and, take a few shots, and not have to use many of his timeouts. He still had the one left over.
Right, and like you say, that maybe was his mindset, was to keep that one timeout so he could pull the trigger whenever he wanted to get a field goal opportunity if circumstances dictated it. Mm-hmm. But it also brings out something else that I think needs to be mentioned, and that I believe will be one of the pieces of conversation about this particular game, this national championship, for years to come, and that is the use of effectively pick plays, rub routes, if you will, by Clemson, particularly in the red zone there close to the end zone, where they were successful on a couple of occasions with using that technique to get wide receivers open, basically at the back corner of the end zone, and that's a play that has become very popular and is very hard to defend when it's allowed. Now, read the letter of the law. If he's picking that guy, that's supposed to be a penalty. But this rub route concept has evolved to where, as long as the receiver does a decent acting job of acting like he was going to that spot for the purpose of a pass play, allows that to be quote quote legal, even though the real purpose of his position is to basically pick the defender.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well,
And
I suppose it's kind of like how different refs will call like pass interference differently. Some refs really like let the boys be boys, as it were, and like let them really fight for it. Whereas others will throw that flag a lot more willingly. So it kind of varies. But from what you've been saying, that it's kind of been a general trend in the in officiating that that flag doesn't get thrown for those sorts of defenses.
correct, exactly. And it's kind of frustrating to me as a guy who's a fan of the rushing game and running the football, that it's those kinds of trends that have kind of guided college football, much like NFL football, to more and more of a passing based game rather than a run based game. And so I'm not necessarily in favor of that trend or that recent trend, and I hope that there's enough feathers ruffled by this that maybe there'll at least be some discussion in the rules committee about whether or not they need to revisit that rule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one final thing about the game itself that I thought was kind of clever was that there at the end of the game, I thought it was interesting that they went for the onside kick, because they had been pooch kicking it like the majority of the game, and I thought that's what they were going to do, was pooch kick it up high, and so the guy would get it and immediately get tackled or whatever. But they went for the onside kick, and by darn, they got it. It passed like right over the 10-yard line, and they scooped it up, which kind of felt like retribution given Alabama's onside kick from the last year's game.
It really was, and again, I'm going to say a little surprising that I don't believe that Alabama's good hands team was on in that situation. You would have thought maybe they would have at least considered putting that group out there. There's always a special group of kickoff receive that you have that's called the good hands team, right? Where you put basically a bunch of tight ends and bigger wide receivers, let's say, on that front line when you're anticipating an onside kick. You want guys that have good hands to be able to secure that ball.
Yep.
But Alabama appeared not to do that. It was pretty clear they were not anticipating that onside kick, because none of the Alabama guys seemed to even go for the ball. It was such a surprise. They all were kind of moving the other way, and then they were just stood there. It wasn't like anybody even really tried until it was too late.
Yeah.
That particular play also brings up another officiating point. That was a game that frankly was a little frustrating, and being in the Vegas book probably made that even more acute for me, because people were freaking out about how long it was taking for some of these reviews, especially in situations where it seemed like Clemson was just getting some momentum, and then they would have some damn review that would take forever and suck all the life out of the stadium and the momentum of the team and all that. And it just seemed like they were doing everything they could to make sure that Clemson was not able to get in rhythm offensively.
Well,
it was crazy. And then at the end of the game to have this ruling, and I guess it must be by rule, and I'm not familiar with the rule. I'm generally pretty familiar with college football rules, but this one I'm not, because to me the game should have ended. There's no way that you can have a play and not have at least 1 second go off the play. Even when someone spikes the ball in a situation where a quarterback is just taking a snap from center and spiking it, that act of doing that usually takes 2 seconds, right? And in this case, they kicked the ball, had a recovery, and no time went off the clock.
Right.
Once that ball travels 10 yards and is touched by either team, because it is a live ball after 10 yards. It's a live ball. it doesn't matter which team touches it at that point and secures control of it. That is a play, and it should have ended right then. How
Mm-hmm.
that clicked off because the play started with only 1 second, so there's
Mm-hmm.
no way that shouldn't have been double zeros, game over. And so apparently by rule you can't have it end on that play. But I've never read that rule. I don't know what that rule says, and you can parlay that circumstance to all kinds of other situations. What if Alabama had recovered it? Would a second have come off then, or would they have said no second? That
Right.
doesn't make sense. That you could have a change of possession, an actual recovery or a reception, if you will, of the kickoff, and not have at least 1 second go off the clock.
Yeah, it was strange for sure. My recollection of their explanation was that it was because Clemson recovered it and the guy didn't pick it up and fall down. He was like already on his knees by the time he slid in and got the ball or whatever. So that they were saying that because Clemson got in, because the guy got in that sort of way, the 1 second didn't go off the clock. But I agree with you. I don't understand that
Yeah,
way of looking at it.
that doesn't make any sense to me. I think 1 second should have gone off the clock.
Yeah, but it was, I don't know, it was an interesting series of events there. Yeah, to end the game, and I agree with you. That was something we noticed too, was that the officiating crew was like, and I get it because it's the championship game and you don't want to get there to be any confusion, but they were being a little overusing their review privileges. There, I would agree.
Yes, yes. So anyway, so let's talk a little bit, Alex, about the implications. Obviously a great game. If you didn't enjoy watching that game, and especially in that fourth quarter, the excitement of that, what another great finish for college football,
Hmm.
and the playoff in general. I think again, the format, the process of having the semifinals, all that stuff went fairly well. I think it was greatly disappointing that Ohio State, laid an egg a little bit and wasn't even able to score a point in their game. But frankly, Clemson had played so well that Ohio State just wasn't up to the challenge.
Well, I think it was actually, it was a good, very good that this championship game turned out to be this entertaining game, just in terms of the simple football enjoyment of it, but also for the perception of the playoff because the two previous games were not, definitely were
That's
not
true.
entertaining games. It was
Kind of
pretty
lopsided.
right. It
Yep.
was pretty obvious who the victor was going to be. So I think it was good to have this sort of close game. And we talked about, on the last podcast how, and I did see this, that it had like a lower rating than
Hmm.
like a national championship has had since I think since the Alabama LSU championship game was the stat I saw. Probably
Hmm.
because Clemson and Alabama was the same two teams from last year, so that's not going to be
Right.
as interesting on the surface, but it turned out to be as you watch the game.
Right. Well, and that's the thing is that there's still some issues to be tweaked, and kudos to the playoff committee group because they are willing to make tweaks and make changes even as this thing kind of evolves as a relatively new entity. But they've recognized that having the semifinals on New Year's Eve has turned out to be a bad thing for ratings, and so they're moving away from that. They understand that they've got to kind of truly reclaim New Year's Day. So I think that's going to be a helpful change as we go forward, and the new conversation seems to be about uh, what it's doing to the other bowl games, meaning it's diminished and made everything else less significant. And of course that's going to happen. You have a playoff structure, and then everything else becomes less relevant. And back in the olden days, this goes back probably before Alex, you were even watching football when we didn't even have BCS or anything. There were often years where there were 6 or 7 bowl games, almost all of them played on New Year's Day, and many of them would have some relevance in determining the national championship because it was a voted on thing. It wasn't the 1 and 2 team playing. The number 1 team might have been playing the number 7 team, and the number two team might be playing the number 3 team, and the number
Hmm.
4 team was playing the number 5 team. I mean, it was just all over the map, right? And so depending on how those fell and what the teams that were in the hunt had played previously, a bowl game that was less relevant in terms of significance, but became significant because the participants had played the other teams in the running. You know what I mean? And so comparative scores, the whole associative property thing, starts to come into play, because it was a vote.
Hmm.
You see what I mean?
Oh yeah, no,
And
no, I agree.
and so all of that was made it interesting for all those different games. And now it's really clear. There's two semifinals and there's a final, and that's it. And everything else is just done as a pageantry.
Right.
And that's what led to the whole conversation about players not playing in the bowl games because they were protecting their bodies for their future NFL careers, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Well, and the strange thing about it to me is that obviously I don't remember that time when it was all decided by the AP and the coaches poll. And I know that the bowls were definitely more relevant then, but that also created all these problems of like, having these polls decide who the champ is rather than, having
Right.
them go
And
head to
shared
head.
national champ, yeah,
Right.
shared national championships, et cetera.
Right. Which is why we instituted the BCS system to begin with, which
Correct.
is the system that I basically my whole time watching football that I've grown up with, until this playoff. But the strange thing to me is that I don't remember hearing all this talk about how the bowls aren't relevant with the BCS, even though it was the same situation there where the championship game was the only game that actually mattered and all the others, were just for brownie points, essentially, in tradition and that sort of thing. So I don't
I
understand why
agree.
it's just now, of course, there's, more two extra games, with the playoff, and there's more stuff for the media to talk about, and so I guess I can see why they've become a little less relevant, but it's not that big of a shift.
Well, and you just hit on it. I think the issue is now, because they now get to talk about 4 teams that are involved in this playoff. Then there's even less time, so to speak, to talk about the other games, and so you end up having some very great traditional games like the Orange Bowl and the Rose Bowl and things like that that are still phenomenal events, phenomenal games, et cetera, et cetera. The Rose Bowl was a great game this year, but they just seem to be less important. And I think that that's what the media types were picking up on, and they just need to have something to talk about. So I think some of it is them filling their airtime, and so it's something to complain about. They have to scrutinize and slice and dice, the implications of things every which way.
Yeah, but getting back to the overall state of football, kind of after this championship game where it leaves us, I think your point about the blocking, the picking rather, the picking on offense, will be something that'll be examined over the off season, and it's good, I think, for the health of the sport for Alabama to lose that championship game and kind of slowing them down, although certainly not stopping them. They're going to be right back in it next year, I believe. But it's not healthy for any sport for one team to be totally dominant, for an extended period. So
Right.
I was certainly happy to see Clemson upset the king, as it were.
I was too, and I think a lot of other people are. They're kind of tired of the worn out storyline of Alabama, and I think enough people know that Nick Saban has been so creative about finding advantages, finding ways to do things, even as recently as this year, where he hired Steve Sarkisian, who is a well-known offensive guru who had just recently gotten fired as head coach earlier in the season from USC, and makes them mid-season into a volunteer assistant coach type of guy. Okay, not assistant coach, volunteer. I don't know what the title was that he gave him, but basically he was working for free, waiting in the wings, knowing, because Nick knew that his time with Lane Kiffin was coming to an end, and whether Lane had gotten a head coaching job or Lane had taken another job with someone else, that was likely that those guys were going to part ways. So he already had his next offensive coordinator, a very talented coach, already lined up and already in their coaching rooms, having conversations, connecting with the players, giving him even the option to do what he did with Lane Kiffin leaving just before the national championship game. No other team would have had the benefit of a talent like Steve Sarkisian sitting in the wings, already connected with what was going on with the team and the players and the relationship with the quarterback to be able to step in and do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's one example. And then also using NFL players and ex
Mm-hmm.
players for practice to give even better looks, to be using ex players who were just out of the NFL or whatever, so that his team can have the best possible look instead of using the traditional scout squad, which is made up of your freshmen and sophomores, your lower
Your second
depth chart
teamers,
players, right?
right?
I mean, just doing all those kinds of things, and of course the one that is my biggest pet peeve, which is the whole roster management thing that he has introduced to college football, that has is a devastating blow to the amateurism of the sport. He moved us dramatically closer to full professional approach to football. I mean, there's already enough people who are, what do I say, brazen to the idea that the football players don't attend class and none of these guys, are really student athletes. Blah blah blah. I would argue that that's not true. I would argue that the majority of those kids do graduate from college. The majority of them end up not playing in the NFL and have careers and lives that go on. Now, were they treated very, very special and got all kinds of advantages? Absolutely. But to suggest that they're not student athletes is contrary to the data. But doing the things that they do now with roster management makes that relationship between the student athlete and the university different. That commitment is not what it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I had heard about the NFL practicing thing earlier in the season, and that was definitely an interesting thing. And I guarantee you, starting next year, you'll see other teams do that too.
Well, Jim Harbaugh is probably already figuring out how he's going to do that.
Yeah. This is a random question. This is something we had talked about on an older podcast about the satellite camps, and I know that the NCAA did come down with some rules like limiting like the amount. Is that right, or like the window in which you could do it?
The window, yep, the window of when you could do it, and I think maybe the amount too, but I think it's mostly about the window of time. And what they're trying to do is protect the coaches from themselves. I mean, what ultimately the message they got back, and their initial reaction was to end them completely because it was something that a lot of teams didn't want done, even though it's been being done kind of quietly and informally for a long time. But then again, Jim Harbaugh made such a national prominent story about it and then just kind of really pushed the envelope. And it does really prove that you've got to get in front of the players. And if the players are in Florida or in Georgia or wherever, Alabama, then there's no reason why a coach like Jim Harbaugh or Mike Riley from Nebraska shouldn't be able to go and have a camp down there where he brings his staff to the players, because those kids can't afford to fly to Lincoln, Nebraska or Ann Arbor, Michigan. I mean, that's a big commitment on their family's part to do that. So they went to them. I think it's completely appropriate. But I think there was also a protect yourself or protect themselves from themselves, because coaches wouldn't know where to draw the line. And so now you got these coaches who are already working 16 hours a day almost every week during the season, and then they're have crazy hours during recruiting all the way to February, and then finally after February they get a little bit of time off. But now recruiting starts up like literally, the day after signing day. The next class is already getting filled. It's that nuts. And then you
Mm-hmm.
got spring practice, so there's no time. And it used to be the summer was a time when they could take a week off and go fishing, and now that's being consumed by these remote camps.
Right. So it's just piling on more and more.
Right.
You
So they got
know.
to protect themselves from themselves.
Right, right. All right. And now transitioning from the kind of the national talk into our Nebraska specific talk, this kind of surprised me. You're more tapped into the Husker side of things, so you may have seen it coming, so to speak. But I just looked on the Reddit page like a couple days ago, and I saw that we had a new young defensive coordinator instead of Mark Banker, and that kind of surprised me.
Yes, no, I got to tell you, I was a bit surprised too. I did not see that coming. I mean, I know that there was disappointment. I was certainly disappointed in the late season swoon of our defense. Our defense's inability to tackle in the Iowa game, pretty much going back to Ohio State. Okay, we were an undefeated team. You go into Ohio State and you kind of get embarrassed by Ohio State. Now, part of that was you lose your quarterback in a kind of an ugly situation, a frightening situation, and and maybe the guys lose their focus a little bit and that sort of stuff. So you write that game off to just playing a team who is really on and who is better than you. But then as the rest of the season unfolded, it just seemed like our defensive scheme and tackling and such deteriorated. It just got worse,
Hmm.
and I think so. Mike Riley was compelled to acknowledge that he maybe didn't have the right guy that was going to take us to a championship type of caliber. And so he had to make a very difficult decision. This was a guy that has been with him a long time. They have been long time coaching associates, so that was not an easy decision for Mike to make. But it
Hmm.
was pretty clear after he made it, he had a quick plan to execute to go find the replacement. And it sounds like this guy that he's gotten, Diaco, is comes to us with a pretty good reputation as a defensive coach and a special teams coach, and including a Bryles Award winner. He was or a Broyles, excuse me, not Bryles, Broyles Award winner, which is the Assistant Coach of the Year award, and so he's highly regarded, highly respected, and young, so pretty good recruiter. So everything that Coach Riley was looking for.
Yeah, no, well, because on our previous podcast we were talking about the our special teams guy who had been fired, and
Right.
I think it's good to see that while Riley is clearly a very nice guy and somebody who has loyalty to the people who have been with him for years, he's also willing to see where they might be lacking and where somebody younger who he's less familiar with might be the better option.
Right, exactly. And so I'm kind of pleased with his willingness to do that. It'll be interesting to see how these choices affect our recruiting class as we come to these last 20 days or so of the recruiting process. And I'll be anxious to see how we end this recruiting season, because it's going to be a very critical one.
Yeah.
We've got some really talented players. I think we've done a decent job, but we had some very painful decommits that kind of took us in the wrong direction, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. And now you boot your defensive coordinator, which always tends to create some doubt and some concern on the part of recruits. So it'll be interesting to see if they can pull that together and kind of sell the existing recruits or existing commits, as well as some new recruits, that hey, we are going in the right direction, and this is going to be a huge success for the Huskers.
Right. Well, I did see that, and I'm probably going to pronounce his name wrong. There's a recruit named Tyhone Lindsay, who was going to go to Ohio State, who just recently has flipped to Nebraska, and he's like a top 50 ranked player, by one of these polls or whatever. So he's very
Right.
highly regarded
It's a highly
receiver.
regarded wide receiver, though. Yeah. So not impacting the defensive side where we have the new coach, but yeah, I mean, we certainly, our coaching staff has identified some top talent. They've been willing to stay patient in going after them, while also recruiting guys that were basically going to be the second choice if those kids said no. And we've certainly had plenty of those top tier kids say no to us, but we've also had some kids say yes. I mean, our quarterback recruit was just named Player of the Year in California. And so there's some really great things going on with regard to some of the talent that's literally already on campus, that have already come in as early entries because they graduated a semester early. So there's some good things going on there, but there's still some huge gaps. We've got a defensive coordinator who runs a different defense. He's known for his 3-4 rather than a 4-3. So that changes up what you need at linebacker, what you need at defensive tackle.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's going to change what our depth charts look like because of that structure.
Right.
So who we need to go after in these last 20 days shifts a little bit.
Yeah, I know. I read about that he had a different defensive scheme. Where was he coaching before?
He was the head coach at the University of Connecticut and had been the last 3 years and had not done well. Got fired in December. But prior to his time as the University of Connecticut head coach, he was the defensive coordinator for Notre Dame from about 2009, I think, until 2012, and included, in that was probably the best years of Brian Kelly's tenure. Um, and he had been with Brian Kelly the previous year at Cincinnati, when Brian Kelly was a coach for a year at Cincinnati before he got the Notre Dame job. And that Cincinnati team went to the Sugar Bowl, and had an outstanding defense that year. So this coach has been known as a darn good coordinator for basically all the years. He's a young guy, and he was a young coordinator back then, and he's still young. So I think he's only like 42, 43 years old.
Yeah, well,
So
yeah, and I think that's good just from the perspective of Riley and a lot of the coaches that followed him from Oregon State are obviously older guys, so getting
right,
somebody who's younger on the staff is good.
right, absolutely. So it's exciting. We now have two relatively young coordinators that are both going to be outstanding coaches, and either one of them potentially could emerge as a replacement for Riley if Riley rights the ship, has some success here for a few years, and then maybe decides it's time for him to step away and put it in the hands of one of those guys. If either of those guys chose to stick around, I think whether it's Langsdorf or this new guy, they have the pedigree and the chops maybe to be a head coach and have some continuity, which I would love to see.
Interesting. So obviously this is very speculative, and presumably if we got into this sort of situation, it'd be a situation where Riley has, like you say, righted the ship and made things better. Not us firing him. But do you think in that situation that our athletic director would hire, promote from within rather than looking to the outside?
Potentially, I think so. Yes, if he if he saw that we were moving in the right direction, that there were a lot of positives going on, and Mike Riley, being as old as he is, was ready to step aside and retire, that they would first look to say, do we have a guy on our staff that could be that guy that would give us that continuity and let us continue. And I think we've got a couple of guys right now that would fit that bill.
Yeah, yeah, it is an exciting time. I definitely think probably the next podcast we should do one after signing week and sort of talk about what our finalized recruiting class ends up being.
I think that's a great idea, and and also we'll be talking about basically a little bit more information about the state of college football. Certainly, looking at that recruiting list has become more and more significant in today's day and age, and then also projecting what Nebraska is going to look like. It's going to be an exciting spring practice with new quarterbacks, finally quarterbacks that kind of fit Danny Langsdorf and Mike Riley's traditional quarterback target, so figuring out who emerges as the likely starter, because our young freshman recruit Gebbia, who just showed up on campus, will be obviously participating in spring practice. So we're going to have 3 or 4 really talented quarterbacks fighting it out for the starting job.
Right. Well, we should say supposedly talented, because we had, I blank on his name, but that 5-star guy who won the big quarterback camp where you have the 9 best quarterbacks come or whatever.
Right.
He came to us and then nothing happened with him.
Right. Yep.
Something
True.
didn't click. So you never know with these situations, but like you say, we have several options. So surely one of them's gonna come through for us at least.
Yep. Well, so between a quarterback battle and a new defense, those are a lot of things for Nebraska fans to want to keep their eye on. So I have a feeling that Nebraska spring game, given decent weather like we've had in recent years, will be a highly attended affair.
Yes, even more so than usual.
Even more so than usual, which is saying something since we usually fill the stadium.
Yeah. That's Nebraska for you. All right.
That's right.
So if you all out there enjoyed listening to this podcast, you can find us at footballthrowdown.podomatic.com. You can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com, or you can find us on iTunes. Just search College Football Throwdown. You can leave ratings and reviews there. We like hearing feedback from people, or leaving a comment on the Podomatic website for this episode works as well. So thank you out there for listening to us ramble here about all this good stuff, the championship game and the new coach and all this fun stuff. Do you have any final words there, Dad?
Well, college football throwdown. That's what it is. So if people can just kind of remember throwdown, that will probably be enough to get them to be able to figure out how to sign up.
That's right. All right. So this is Alex Schmitz signing off along with Peter Schmitz. Go Big Red.
Go Big Red.